Korean billionaire
Who are you?
CEO
This is
visited the
private.
wrong hospital
Sorry,
room,
wrong room.
met
I
a
thought it
sick
was
woman with no
312.
visitors.
Wait, do I know you?
6 months
You
later,
look
he did the
familiar, too. What are
unthinkable.
you doing
He
here?
was running late for a meeting with a business partner at Massachusetts General Hospital. As CEO of one of Korea's largest tech companies, Min-ho Park rarely had time for hospital visits in America. But that day, he took a wrong turn and ended up in room 327 instead of 372. The woman lying there hadn't had a visitor in 47 days. What she said to him that day changed everything, and what he did for her 6 months later has shocked the entire country. This isn't just a story about kindness. It's about how one wrong turn can change countless lives forever. If you believe in fate bringing people together at exactly the right moment, hit that like button right now and keep watching. You won't believe what happens next. Min-ho Park was 43 years old, the CEO of Korea Tech, valued at over $17 billion. He had everything that society told him should make him happy. A penthouse overlooking the Han River. A collection of cars he never drove. More money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. He also had ulcers, insomnia, and hadn't taken a vacation in 7 years. That Thursday in March, Min-ho was angry. The kind of cold, controlled anger that successful people channel into productivity. His development team had missed another deadline. The American market was underperforming. His ex-wife had called to remind him he'd missed their son's science fair, the third school event he'd missed that month. He was running on 4 hours of sleep and his 6th cup of coffee when his assistant reminded him of the meeting at Mass General. One of their major investors had undergone cardiac surgery. The visit was purely strategic, show his face, ensure continued funding for the next quarter. Human connection reduced to a financial transaction. That's who Min-ho was then. The hospital halls were a maze of identical white corridors. He was checking stock prices on his phone instead of watching where he was going. Room 372, the nurse had said. Or was it 327? He didn't bother confirming. Time was money, and he was hemorrhaging seconds standing in that sterile hallway. Min-ho pushed open the door to what he thought was room 372 without knocking. Why would he knock? In his world, doors opened for him, not the other way around. But the woman in the hospital bed wasn't his investor. She was young, early 30s maybe, with a thin face and hollowed cheeks. Her dark skin had taken on an ashen quality, and what he could see of her hair beneath the colorful head wrap had thinned considerably. Tubes ran from her arms, her nose. A machine beeped steadily beside her. What struck him most were her eyes. Deep brown, intelligent, and completely devoid of hope. The room was empty, not just of people. Empty of everything that suggests someone cares. No flowers. No cards lined up on the windowsill. No personal items except a worn notebook on the side table. The TV wasn't even on. Just the sound of machines and the faint smell of antiseptic. It was the loneliest room he'd ever seen. He immediately stepped back. Wrong room. Sorry for the disturbance. But before he could close the door, she spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, with a slight southern accent. Are you looking for Mr. Collins in 372? You need to go down to the end of this hall and turn left. She smiled weakly. The numbers here are confusing. He should have thanked her and left. That's what the old Min-ho would have done. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the way she tried to be helpful despite her condition. Maybe it was the stillness of that empty room. Yes, thank you. I apologize for disturbing you. She shook her head slightly. No disturbance. It's actually nice to see a new face. Then she looked at him more carefully, her head tilted. You're Min-ho Park, aren't you? From Korea Tech. He nodded, impatient. He was used to being recognized. I saw you on the cover of Forbes last month. Then she said something that stopped him from leaving. Why does someone who has everything look so lonely? Min-ho felt his face flush with anger. Who was this sick woman to analyze him? To see through the carefully constructed facade he showed the world? He almost snapped at her, but the gentle curiosity in her eyes held no judgment. I should go, he said stiffly. Of course. Mr. Collins is expecting you. She looked out the window. Thank you for the brief, company, anyway. It's been 47 days since anyone besides medical staff has been in this room. 47 days. She'd been counting the days of her isolation. Something cracked inside him. What's your name? He asked. Laura Johnson. Are you expecting visitors today, Laura Johnson? She laughed softly, but it wasn't a happy sound. No, not today. Not tomorrow. Probably not ever again. He should have felt pity. Instead, he felt an irrational flare of anger. Not at her, but at the empty chairs beside her bed. At the absence of flowers. At the 47 days. I'll come back tomorrow, he said, shocking himself with the words. Her eyes widened slightly. You don't need to do that. I know, he replied, already reaching for his phone to have his assistant reschedule tomorrow's morning meetings. But I will. Keep watching, because what he discovered about her past will break your heart. The reason she's alone will make you question humanity. Minho did come back the next day. He told himself it was curiosity, or perhaps guilt. The truth was, her question about his loneliness had cut too deep. There was something liberating about being seen, really seen, by a stranger who wanted nothing from him. Laura was surprised when he walked in with a small orchid. You actually came back, she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. I said I would. In his business world, Minho's word was his bond, at least professionally. His personal promises had a poorer track record, as his ex-wife and son could attest. He placed the orchid on her windowsill. It looked pathetic there, a single spot of color in the clinical whiteness. Tell me why you're counting days, Laura Johnson. She studied him for a moment, as if assessing whether he genuinely wanted to know or was simply making conversation. Apparently, she decided on the former. I taught 4th grade in Dorchester. I loved it, watching children discover the world, seeing their faces light up when they finally understood something difficult. Her voice softened with the memory. 2 years ago, I started feeling tired all the time, bruising easily. I ignored it, or teachers always put themselves last. By the time I collapsed while leading a field trip to the Museum of Science, the cancer had already spread throughout my lymphatic system. She said this clinically, as if reading someone else's medical report. Your family? He asked, taking a seat in the visitor's chair that had been empty for 47 days. Her smile was small and bitter. My parents died in a car accident when I was in college. My brother lives in California, but he has his own family, his own problems. We haven't been close since I moved east for graduate school. Friends? Colleagues? He pressed, uncomfortable with the mounting evidence of her isolation. The first 6 months, my fellow teachers visited, brought letters from my students, but eventually they stopped coming. Cancer is inconvenient. People don't know what to say, so they say nothing. They don't know what to do, so they do nothing. Her matter-of-factness was more devastating than tears would have been. What about? He gestured vaguely to her left hand, which bore the faint tan line of a removed ring. Her face tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus, my fiancé. He stuck around through the first round of chemo and radiation, held my hand while I vomited, told me I was still beautiful when all my hair fell out. She touched her head wrap self-consciously. When the first treatment failed, when the doctors said we were looking at a more aggressive approach with lower odds of success, he said he couldn't watch me suffer anymore. The anger Minho felt then surprised him with its intensity. He abandoned you? When you needed him most? Laura shrugged, but he could see the pain behind her forced nonchalance. He said he didn't sign up to love someone who was dying. That it wasn't fair to ask him to build a life with someone who might not have a future. Her voice cracked slightly. The night before my second round of treatment began, he packed his things and left. His parting words were that he needed to protect his heart. Minho gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white. And what about your heart? Cancer patients don't have the luxury of protection, she said simply. They sat in silence for a moment. The steady beeping of her monitors punctuated the quiet. You mentioned students, he finally said. Her face brightened slightly. Yes, my fourth graders. For months after I got sick, they made me cards. Sent me videos of them singing songs we'd learned together. Their parents would bring them to visit on weekends. And now, the light in her eyes dimmed. One of the mothers decided that exposure to serious illness would be traumatic for the children. Then another parent suggested that seeing someone so sick might give them nightmares. Within weeks, the visits stopped. The cards stopped. I became a cautionary tale rather than their teacher. She picked at the edge of her blanket. Children follow their parents' lead. If adults treat illness like it's contagious or shameful, children learn to stay away too. Minho felt physically ill, not just at the cruelty of her fiancé or the fear of the parents, but at how familiar it all seemed. Hadn't he done the same thing countless times? Avoided difficult situations? Prioritized his comfort over others' needs? Cut people out when they no longer served his purpose? "What's in the notebook?" he asked, nodding toward the worn journal on her bedside table. Laura's expression softened. "My stories. I always wrote stories for my students. Little tales about courage and kindness and finding magic in ordinary places. I thought maybe someday I could publish them with illustrations." She laughed softly. "Silly dream now, I suppose." "May I?" He gestured toward the notebook. She hesitated, then nodded. He opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of handwritten stories, some accompanied by simple sketches. He read the first one, about a small bird with a broken wing who discovered she could still sing beautifully even if she couldn't fly. The story was simple but profound, touching something deep inside him that he thought had calcified years ago. "These are extraordinary," he said, meaning it. "Thank you." She looked embarrassed by the praise. "They keep me company now. The characters, they're the only visitors who never stopped coming." Minho checked his watch, an automatic gesture born from decades of scheduling his life in 15-minute increments. He had a board meeting in an hour, hundreds of millions of dollars hanging on his presence. And yet, "Would you read one to me?" he asked. The surprise on her face was worth being late. She took the notebook with trembling hands and began to read a story about a lonely lighthouse keeper who collected pieces of broken glass from the shore and created a magnificent stained glass window that saved ships during the darkest storm. Her voice grew stronger as she read. For those few minutes, she wasn't a cancer patient. She was a storyteller, a teacher, an artist creating worlds with her words. When she finished, Minho sat in silence, moved in a way he hadn't been in years. "I have to go," he said finally, "but I'd like to hear more tomorrow." This time, the disbelief on her face was less pronounced. "I'll be here," she said with a small smile. "It's not like I have other plans." As he walked out, he realized he hadn't checked his phone once during their conversation. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the compulsive need to. This story is about to take an incredible turn. Hit subscribe now because what happens at the 3-month mark will restore your faith in humanity. Drop a comment if you've ever met someone who changed your life by accident. Minho returned the next day, and the day after that. Their conversations became the fixed point around which his days revolved. For a man who had built his empire on the relentless pursuit of the next goal, the next acquisition, the next milestone, this sudden attachment to a dying woman in room 327 made no rational sense. His executive team noticed his distraction. His assistant questioned his new schedule, with its daily 90-minute block labeled simply MGH Hospital. The board members murmured about his declining participation in international calls. He didn't care. Something was shifting inside him, plates of ice breaking apart after a long winter. On his 7th visit, Minho arrived to find Laura in distress. Her breathing labored, her face contorted in pain. "What's happening?" he demanded of the nurse who was adjusting her medication. "Her condition is deteriorating," the young woman replied carefully. "The current treatment isn't working as well as we'd hoped." "Then try something else," he snapped. The nurse looked at him with patient empathy. "Mr. Park, Laura has exhausted all the treatment options covered by her insurance. There are experimental protocols, but they're prohibitively expensive, especially for someone with limited resources. Min-ho felt that familiar cold anger rising. Get her doctor. Now. Dr. Reynolds was a respected oncologist in his early 60s. He spoke to Min-ho in the hallway outside Laura's room with the practiced compassion of someone who had delivered bad news thousands of times. The cancer has grown resistant to conventional therapies, he explained. There are some promising new treatments in clinical trials, but Ms. Johnson isn't eligible due to her advanced condition and lack of financial resources. What if money wasn't an issue? Min-ho interrupted. Dr. Reynolds blinked. Well, there's a new immunotherapy protocol at MD Anderson in Houston that might be suitable for her specific pathology. But we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there's no guarantee. Make it happen, Min-ho said, already pulling out his phone. Whatever it costs, get her into that trial. If they won't take her, bring the treatment here. I'll cover everything. The doctor looked skeptical. Mr. Park, I appreciate your generosity, but you need to understand the odds. Even with the best treatment, Ms. Johnson's 5-year survival rate is... Did I ask for statistics? Min-ho's voice was dangerously quiet. I said make it happen. Today. Consider cost irrelevant. And get her moved to a private room in the VIP wing. One with a view of the Charles River. Min-ho spent the next week leveraging every connection he had. Called in favors from business partners in America. Had his company's legal team work around the clock to navigate insurance authorizations. Flew in specialists from 3 countries. Laura protested when she learned what he was doing. This is insane, she said. Now settled in a luxurious private suite that looked more like a hotel than a hospital room. You barely know me. Why would you spend this kind of money on a stranger? He couldn't articulate why. Not fully. Because your stories deserve to be finished, he said finally. Because 47 days without visitors is 47 days too many. Because your fiancé was a coward, and I refuse to be another person who walks away. The truth was more complicated. In Laura's empty room, in her solitary battle, Min-ho had recognized something of himself. Behind his wealth and power and constant motion was the same essential loneliness. The same fear that if he stopped achieving, stopped accumulating, stopped moving, he too would be abandoned. Week 2 turned into week 4. The new treatment protocol began. Min-ho rearranged his entire schedule around Laura's treatment sessions. Sat with her through the violent nausea, the fevers, the days when pain medications left her drifting in and out of consciousness. His assistant finally confronted him. Sir, the board is concerned. You've missed 3 major investor meetings. The Chicago merger is stalling. People are starting to talk. Let them talk, Min-ho replied, not looking up from the quarterly report he was reviewing while sitting beside Laura's sleeping form. Handle what you can. Postpone what you can't. Sir, with all due respect, you're risking everything you've built for. For what? For who? This woman isn't family. She isn't even a friend. She's just someone you met by accident. He looked up then, fixing his assistant with the cold stare that had made countless employees tremble over the years. She has a name, Laura Johnson. And yes, I met her by accident. But there are no accidents, Young-hoon. Only doors we choose to walk through or walk past. I'm choosing this door. By week 6, the experimental treatment was taking its toll. Laura lost what little weight she had left. The pain was excruciating despite the medication. There were days when Min-ho sat beside her for hours, reading her stories back to her when she was too weak to speak, just so she could hear her own words and remember who she was beyond the disease consuming her. One particularly bad night, after a seizure that left the medical team rushing in with emergency equipment, Min-ho found himself alone with her in the darkened room. The crisis had passed, but the fear lingered like a ghost in the corners. Why are you still here? Laura whispered, her voice raw. You should go home. Get some sleep. He realized he'd been at the hospital for nearly 30 hours straight. Had canceled the global product launch they'd been planning for months without a second thought. I'm exactly where I need to be, he said. She studied him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see past all his defenses. You know, for a billionaire CEO, you're remarkably bad at prioritizing. Minho laughed, a genuine laugh that felt foreign in his throat. Perhaps I'm finally learning to prioritize correctly. Minho, she said softly, using his given name for the first time. I need to ask you something important. He tensed, prepared for the worst, that she wanted to stop treatment, that the pain was too much, that she was giving up. Would you? She hesitated. Would you bring me some mac and cheese from Sylvia's Soul Food on Tremont Street? I've been craving it for months. The absurdity of her request, comfort food in the middle of this life and death battle, broke something open inside him. Minho laughed until tears came, and then he wasn't sure if he was laughing or crying. Mac and cheese, he repeated, wiping his eyes. From Sylvia's on Tremont. Nothing else will do. She smiled, a flash of her old self breaking through the pain. Nothing else. I dreamed about it 3 nights in a row. It's a sign. Then mac and cheese you shall have, even if I have to wake up the owner in the middle of the night. 2 hours later, they sat in her hospital room eating takeout from styrofoam containers. It was 3 a.m. She could only manage a few bites, but the joy on her face as she savored each one was worth the chaos he'd caused having his driver speed across Boston for this specific dish. This, she said, setting down her fork, is living, not just surviving but living. Thank you for that gift. When month 3 arrived, something unexpected happened. Dr. Reynolds entered the room with an unusual expression, cautious optimism. The latest scans show a 30% reduction in tumor mass, he announced. It's a significant response, far better than we anticipated at this stage. Laura and Minho exchanged a look of disbelief. What does this mean? He asked. It means the treatment is working, Dr. Reynolds replied. It's not a cure, not yet. But it's the first positive indication we've had since her diagnosis. If this trend continues, he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. A possibility had entered the room that hadn't existed before. A tiny, fragile seed of hope. That night, Minho sat by Laura's bed as usual, working on his tablet while she slept. But he wasn't reviewing acquisition proposals or market analyses. He was researching children's book publishers, learning about illustration techniques, studying the market for educational storytelling. By month 4, Laura could walk short distances. The doctors were using words like remarkable and unprecedented to describe her response to the treatment. Her hair was beginning to grow back, soft, downy tufts that she laughingly compared to a baby chick's. Minho took her on her first outing, a brief visit to a nearby park to see the cherry blossoms. She was frail, leaning heavily on his arm, but her face when she looked up at the pale pink canopy overhead was transcendent. I didn't think I'd see another spring, she whispered. He tightened his grip on her arm. I think you'll see many more. As they sat on a bench watching the petals drift down around them, Laura turned to him. Your company's stock has dropped 12% in the past month. Minho looked at her in surprise. You're tracking Koreateca's market performance? She nodded. Every day. The nurses bring me financial newspapers now. They think it's strange, but I want to know what's happening with your company while you're sitting in my hospital room. He shrugged. The market fluctuates. It will recover. The financial analysts say your unexplained absence is causing investor concern, that your erratic behavior and neglect of core business functions is undermining confidence. Her voice was gentle but insistent. Minho, you're risking everything you've built. For what? For me? A dying teacher you met by mistake. You're not dying anymore, he said firmly. And even if you were, yes, I would risk it all. Because sitting in that hospital room with you has taught me more about what matters than 20 years in boardrooms ever did. She looked troubled. I never wanted to destroy your life. You haven't destroyed anything, he insisted. You've helped me see what was already broken. When month 5 arrived, the rumors about Minho's mental state had reached a fever pitch in business circles. The board called an emergency meeting, which he attended via video conference from Laura's hospital room, an act of defiance that only fueled speculation. "Min-ho, we're concerned," the chairman said, his diplomatic tone barely concealing his frustration. "Your preoccupation with this personal matter is affecting shareholder confidence. The American expansion has stalled. The European investors are threatening to pull out. And now we hear you're considering canceling the New York conference." "Not considering," Min-ho corrected calmly. "I've already canceled it." The collective intake of breath was audible even through the video feed. "This is unacceptable," one board member burst out. "You've built this company from nothing into a global powerhouse, and now you're throwing it all away for what? Some charity case? A midlife crisis? Are you having some kind of breakdown?" Min-ho should have been angry at their presumption. Instead, he felt a strange calm. "I appreciate your concerns," he said, "and I understand them. 6 months ago, I would have shared them. But something has changed." He paused, searching for words that could bridge the vast chasm between the man he had been and the man he was becoming. "I've changed." "Min-ho," the chairman leaned forward, his voice lowered as if sharing a confidence. "We all admire your charitable impulses. Set up a foundation. Donate to cancer research. But don't sacrifice everything you've worked for. Don't throw away your legacy." Legacy. The word hung in the air between them. What was his legacy? Buildings with his name on them? A fortune he couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes? A son who barely knew him? Ex-wives who resented him? "I'll have a decision for you by the end of the month," he promised and ended the call. Laura, who had been pretending to sleep during the conversation, opened her eyes. "They're right, you know. You've worked too hard to throw it all away." Min-ho took her hand, thinner than it should be, but stronger than it had been. "What if I'm not throwing anything away? What if I'm finally reaching for something real?" At exactly 6 months from the day he walked into the wrong hospital room, Min-ho made the decision that shocked the entire country. He called a press conference in the garden of Massachusetts General Hospital. The media assumed it would be about Koreateka's next innovation or a major acquisition. Instead, with Laura sitting beside him in a wheelchair, her hair now growing back in soft curls, Min-ho announced his immediate resignation as CEO of Koreatech. "Effective today," he told the stunned reporters, "I am stepping down from my position to establish the Laura Johnson Foundation for Children with Rare Diseases, with an initial endowment of $300 million from my personal assets." Cameras flashed frantically. Reporters shouted questions. The stock market would plummet within hours. None of it mattered. "Additionally," he continued, "I am converting the East Wing of the Koreatech America headquarters into a children's book publishing house specializing in stories that help young people understand illness, loss, and hope. Laura Johnson, a gifted educator and writer, will serve as creative director." Min-ho looked at Laura, whose eyes were filled with tears. 6 months ago, I walked into the wrong hospital room and found someone who had been abandoned by everyone who should have stood by her. I made a promise then that she would never be alone again. Today, I'm extending that promise to every child fighting a battle that seems too big, too lonely, too unfair. The questions came rapid fire. "Are you having a mental breakdown? Is this a publicity stunt? Are you and Ms. Johnson romantically involved? What about Koreateka's shareholders?" Min-ho raised a hand for silence. 6 months ago, I was the loneliest man in Korea, surrounded by wealth and power and absolutely nothing that mattered. Today, I'm the richest man in the world, but not because of the money in my accounts. He reached for Laura's hand. Sometimes the wrong room is exactly where you're supposed to be. The headlines the next day were predictably sensational. Tech billionaire throws away empire for terminal patient. Min-ho Park's midlife crisis costs shareholders billions. Love in the cancer ward. Korea's most eligible bachelor gives up everything for dying teacher. They all missed the point. In the year since that press conference, the Laura Johnson Foundation has funded treatment for over 300 children with rare diseases. The publishing house has released Laura's stories in 17 languages, with royalties funding additional medical research. The first series features characters based on her former students, the same children whose parents had deemed her too traumatizing to visit. As for Laura herself, her cancer isn't gone. The battle continues with good days and bad. But her last 3 scans have shown continued improvement. Last month, she was strong enough to visit her old school, where she read her published stories to a new generation of 4th graders who looked at her like she was magic incarnate. Minho moved out of his Seoul penthouse into a modest apartment near the hospital in Boston, simplified his life, learned to cook, started calling his son every day instead of sending expensive gifts to compensate for his absence, discovered that he sleeps better in a small bed with less weight on his conscience. The business world still doesn't understand what happened to Minho Park. Former colleagues look at him with a mixture of pity and confusion when their paths cross. They think he lost his mind, his ambition, his edge. They're wrong. He finally found his purpose. Last week, Minho and Laura sat in a small garden behind the publishing house. She was having a good day, color in her cheeks, strength in her voice, that sparkle in her eyes that illness dimmed but never extinguished. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Giving up everything?" He considered the question seriously. "I gave up nothing that I truly needed and gained everything I didn't know I was missing." He took her hand, tracing the veins that carried both medicine and possibility through her body. "I walked into the wrong room and found myself. How could I regret that? The doctors still won't use the word remission. The future remains uncertain. But then, isn't it always? The difference is that now Minho understands what matters in the time we're given, whether that's decades or days. This story changed lives, and hopefully it changed yours too. Hit that subscribe button right now for more real stories about extraordinary acts of kindness. Share this with someone who needs to believe that beautiful things can come from life's wrong turns. Comment below with the moment someone unexpected changed your life forever. Remember, sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest mistakes. No one knows what tomorrow will bring for Laura and Minho. Only that he will face it beside her, grateful for the wrong turn that led him to room 327, to a woman who had been counting days of loneliness, to a purpose larger than profit margins and market share. They say he did something unthinkable. The truth is, once Minho saw clearly, it was the only thing he could do. Sometimes you have to lose your way to find your path. Sometimes you have to enter the wrong room to find your right place in the world. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, you find someone worth changing everything for.